Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. I'm Stu Hardy, joined as always by Derek Brissett. Derek, there's been a lot of rugby this weekend. Something called the Premiership, deciding final positions, the URC, something Ospreys, something. To be honest, I don't really care. None of it matters because
None of
in
it
the
does.
early hours of Sunday morning for us mere mortals, down in New Zealand, history was made. Because the thing is, last week, in the last episode, I mentioned Australia, the Wallaroos, were a team that Canada has never lost to, and that the Black Ferns was a team that they had never beaten. But there's an interesting thing about never, is that it's never, never all the time. And in doing so, I think it was like the commentator's curse. I was just putting it out there. Oh, they've never beaten them. And I think the Canadian women heard that. And in the words of Michael Jordan, took that personally and went out to show how wrong I was and that history can be made in. And any way you're going to do it, you're going to do it on home turf against New Zealand. They have all the advantages. They didn't have the black kit, and some people are saying like that's the reason a
Dude,
lot of 2007 Men's World Cup memories flooding back into the mind.
I know we're going with obviously we're the Canadian rugby podcast, so we're about to go for like an hour on how this is the greatest rugby team that has ever existed in the history of the sport. But
Mm-hmm.
I am firmly on the side that the black kit has some sort of magical properties. The black kit actually does make you play better. And they stink in white. Like I'm not saying that that's why they lost, but as soon as I saw the white kit, I was like, this is the day. Like it'll happen today. They like you can't you can't not beat New Zealand if they're wearing white. Like that's just what it is. They actually stink in white.
And this game held in Christchurch, and there seems to be a lot of excuses that the Antipodean media is going out. It's like, oh, they were in the white kit, they were playing in Christchurch, the wind was blowing 1 mile an hour quicker than they thought it was.
What's wrong with Christchurch? Is New Zealand
It's
not?
not Eden Park.
Oh, I mean, well, whatever. All right, sure. Is
Yeah,
that's all it is? It's like
yeah. You have certain stadia across New Zealand, and they're like the fortress. I think like
World
Eden
Cup
Park.
champions. You can't play 2 hours away from where you normally play.
Yeah, yeah. Well, these decisions are always out of our hands and clearly done by somebody who wasn't from New Zealand, because otherwise it would have been sold out stadia at Eden Park.
I kind of wish
But
Canada wore their black kit because that would have been awesome. Show up in New Zealand. We're black in New Zealand. That
yeah,
would have made this even better.
that would have been
Would have been even. I
hilarious.
should have wore the black kit in New Zealand
But
at home or at away at New Zealand and be amazing.
away in New Zealand at their home ground,
You know what?
their home
Actually,
turf.
now that Canada has beaten New Zealand, the next time they do play New Zealand, I think this out earns them the right to wear the black kit in that game.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
get no matter where that game is, they get to be the black team against New Zealand. Really put your stamp on the rugby world.
Well, let's talk about the game itself. We'll just give you like a brief overview of what happened because if you want to, and you should, the highlights are available on
Highlight.
rugbypass.tv.
The full
And
game is still on TSN on demand. Also, if you don't want to do that, you can maybe get a little cheeky YouTube search going before that gets pulled out.
yeah. So it started off pretty well. Sophie de Goody getting the first points on the board with a penalty. And then New Zealand realized they were New Zealand and they pulled out all the stops to get the first try of the game. And yeah, and then, it's one of those standard New Zealand team tries of coming together, spreading the defense thin, and then bringing it over. Caitlin Vahakolo and getting like the first try of the match. And then if you've been following World Rugby's like social media pages, they were posting like the second try, which was like an inside pass again to Vahakolo. And, just Walt to go for getting the second try of the game, a 14-3 lead. And, considering the result last year, it felt very much we've seen this song and dance before. We know where this is going. The problem was that New Zealand didn't realize is that Canada has fancy Bermudez, and credit to New Zealand, their defense was very impressive. Stopping the driving maul from becoming a try, but pass out the back. And Fancy Bermudez was there over the whitewash. Sophie de Goody getting the conversion. Half time 14-10. Then we go into the second half. McKinley Hunt, following on from her double last week, getting another try. This time, DeGoody missing. But then we had probably one of the big changes in the match with Sylvia Brunt getting a yellow card and New Zealand down to 14 players. And then it's pretty much deja vu because we have another driving maul attempt that is held back. And then Fancy Bermudez is on hand, gets the ball down. Sophie de Goody gets the conversion. And then there was a bit of a miscommunication. And just when it looked like Canada were 3 tries up, it was called back, the TMO, saying that there'd been an obstruction. Okay, maybe I'm a bit biased. This is the Canadian rugby podcast. So I was like, was it obstruction really? But I think it was because the player in question stopped, didn't continue her line, and was therefore like basically became a stationary object, and that was obstruction. So from that perspective, I can kind of see that. Yeah, again, Sophie de Goody trying to explain that she was a passing option, and that's why she stopped. But the referee wasn't hearing any of it.
My my
Uh,
my issue with that wasn't so much the call, it was just that Sophie de Goody kicked the conversion. So
yeah,
like I even though like I think you can maybe watch that and be like, it's probably the right call, but it's like, you gotta make that call like
a lot
faster.
sooner.
Yeah, like you can't because it's like the Goody
Mm.
kicked the conversion, so that should be done or whatever.
Yeah,
But I guess that
well,
doesn't matter anymore. Yeah.
yeah, that law change actually happened just before the 23 Men's World Cup because it used to be once you kick the conversion, you can't argue it anymore. You just continue with the game. And it got changed from the conversion to the restart.
Then my
So,
question is, why
yeah.
do other refs tell the kicker to stop and not let them kick it?
Well, it's usually because the TMO has already spotted something. Basically, the
Yeah, but
TMO
if it
was a bit
doesn't matter,
slow on the upkeep.
if
And
you can call it back after the conversion anyways, what does it matter how long it takes the TMO, right?
yeah, I suppose that's true. But then
I
again,
don't know. I
if the
think
TMO gets it now, then we just work with
to
that.
be
Um,
fair, I think there's a little bit of like the rugby gods see everything that
mhm.
happens, right? And before I do want to talk about it because I do think it was a real in more detail because I think it was a critical point in the game considering what surrounded it. But before the first half, Canada stopped and held up a maul from New Zealand across the line.
Yeah,
There was that one camera angle that was kind of like, ooh, like did you hold that up or did because there was that
yeah.
one camera angle that was very interesting. And I'm sure Black Ferns fans are kind of pointing to that. So I think Canada might have got away with one there, and then I think maybe New Zealand gets away with one later in the game. So maybe kind of evens it up a little bit. Not saying
Hmm.
that's why the officials made those calls, but I think like the rugby gods see everything and everything will get balanced. The ball bounces
Yeah,
if you deserve to have the ball bounce your way sometimes. So um I don't know, maybe a bit of luck for New Zealand there, but I think like, Canada got a piece of luck earlier in the game too. So
yeah. Well, speaking of luck, it went from good to bad because in the 70th minute, Olivia Apps made a very bad tackle.
mm,
And watching it live, yeah, or watching it as you saw it as like going, oh, it's like I know it's bad. I know it's card worthy. I just don't know which card it is. Because
That's
and then when they show the slow motion, it's like, oh no.
I I feel like that's just a yellow. Like I wasn't really worried about it being a red, seeing it. I kind of think that's just
Well, that's the thing because it went to the bunker, so you obviously don't know, and then things can be decided. Um, and it was only until the restart after
which is
the
so dumb, by the way.
Yapo
I hate the
try.
bunker. The bunker's the dumbest idea. Just make a call. Make a call. We don't need to come back 15 minutes later to tell me what the card is.
Yeah.
By the way,
Well, either way, that being a player down then opened the opportunity for New Zealand to get back on the board. And as I said, they scored a try with Maliapo. The conversion was missed. And then it was just 5 agonizing minutes
yeah.
trying to see that clock out. And then Itunu got a yellow card as well. So it was 14 all, and it was also with like a minute to go. Um, but yeah, one thing I've not been mentioning is just the sheer amount of penalties New Zealand were conceding in this game. It was incredible. I think like something about like the probably around just before the first penalty, so probably within like the first 10 minutes, Canada had conceded one, New Zealand had conceded five. And it did seem as though because like in certain instances, it's like just before the Itunu yellow, there was an instance of in the driving mall a New Zealand player
There's like three
entering from the
penalties.
side. Yeah, it's like it
Yeah,
was
there was three
the same
penalties
as like
on that one
yeah,
play. Yeah.
yeah, and it was just one of these things of like
Like
what?
I think but like that's the thing though, right? Is you get teams like New Zealand and who are like the World Cup champions, right?
Yeah,
They're also New Zealand, right?
yeah,
Frankly, this team is not used to losing, right?
mhm,
And obviously, especially not used to losing to Canada, right? As we said
yeah,
earlier, right? And I think what you get sometimes, I think when you see teams like England or like New Zealand or even like England in the World Cup final, right? When they were what were they on 30 something straight wins before that World Cup game, right?
yeah,
Um, I think sometimes when you get teams that aren't used to losing in situations where they're down super late in the game. I don't
mhm,
necessarily want to say that they don't know what to do, but I think those teams kind of become a little more desperate trying and players try to make something happen, right? They're trying to because like at the end of this game, right? Canada, who's a team that's like you defends the leads a lot, they're in close games a lot, right? Like especially in that part, like afterwards when it was just like they were trying to run the clock down, they were very calm, they were cool, they're collected the whole time, right? Like even even the a turnover that they gave up, it didn't look like it phased them. They were just like, okay, like what's the next job? Let's move on, right? And they did a very good job of that. And I think for New Zealand, like being down pretty much the entirety of the second half is a position that they're not used to be in. So, like on that play that ended up in the yellow card with 76 minutes left, which it was real bad for New Zealand because that was still during the apps yellow, right? So that evened it up back to 14 on 14. But I think you get like okay, like Canada's got a line out, they're close to like scoring again, this could put the game away. I think you get players playing a little bit more desperately, and I think sometimes when players play desperately, that'll get them more makes them more prone to take penalties because they're trying to force something to happen, even though like they're mauled and like Canada already scored a couple tries off the line out maul, right? So I think it's like you're trying to do anything to prevent that, but what also that leads you to is players are going to start taking penalties in doing that. And I think that's kind of all that happened there. And I think it's just something for like if you're the Black Ferns or even the All Blacks for that matter, right? It's like when like you're not necessarily used to those positions all the time, or maybe the All Blacks are getting more used to those positions, but that's another discussion entirely. But like you're not necessarily used to this for the Black Ferns unless you're playing a team like England, right? And the last time you played England, you beat them, right? So it's like I think sometimes it's like they obviously have a lot of experience on their team, but if you really go back to it, I don't know how much experience do they really have coming from behind to win games, right? And like trying to, you have to make a huge goal line stand and then go 100 meters in order to
Yeah.
win, right? Like that's something that they're not accustomed to doing. So I think that breeds a little bit of like desperation in players, tr- not necessarily doing something bad, but like you're trying to force things to happen because
Hmm.
you need to turn that ball over, which they did. And then they actually did turn the ball over. I think, a play later, like the phase after the yellow card was given out, they actually did manage to do it.
Yeah.
But as just I think that's just kind of any team that's losing late, you get a little desperate. And I think also when you're not used to losing late, you get even more desperate than teams that are maybe more comfortable in those positions.
Yeah. No, I understand that. As in, like, you're so used to being at the top that
No.
being behind is
Well, it's like there's
it's a different environment than what you're used
uh,
to,
no,
especially for like the Black Ferns who have, you know, prior to this game never lost to Canada, and the closest Canada had ever been prior was still a 10-point deficit. So
it's
I
like
mean, I
it's
mean,
extreme.
but then again, I can also like just to cast your mind back to WXV1 last year, where not only did the Black Ferns lose to England, but they also lost to France as well. And looking at this competition and WXV, you know, it's not the World Cup. It doesn't matter in the
No,
grand scheme of things. It's like, yeah,
matter.
you could, if
It's
you
gonna matter.
lose every game and then win all of them in the World Cup, you're the world champion. It doesn't matter what happened before.
No, but
And we've said on this podcast of like, because New Zealand and Canada are in this position where they can, you know, have that flexibility to try new things, to get new players in, and not have to worry about, oh, is this gonna cost us qualification for the World Cup as a result? Because they're already on the flight to England next year. So I, obviously, huge achievement for Canada, but I also wouldn't take your eye off the Black Ferns
oh no, like
and absolutely like coming in to WXV, they're going to be playing France and England again, probably trying out new tactics as well. Ireland, I think that's a game they can definitely win. They're also,
hmm.
I think they have games planned before WXV, but I've forgotten who their opponents are. It may be England. No, it is England. Sorry. Um, so yeah, it's working out for them, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's like they are like Canada in the position that now is the time to try new things, and if it doesn't work, you keep that in mind, and then because in about 18 months' time, that's when the real big game for New Zealand comes around, and
Well,
that's what they're going to be focused on.
I mean, yeah, like it's still like you have to. Think those still like. I mean, I don't want to get too far away from the game because I think there's a lot to talk about in the game. But I think this is
Yeah.
like
Oh no, absolutely.
a great moment for like women's rugby like globally. Because like
Hmm.
I think like going into like WXV, like you know what I mean. Like how awesome is WXV gonna be if it's kind of like in a way, it's kind of like if it becomes like the women's, like sort of maybe like Six Nations and the Rugby Championship are the big tournaments for the men's game. And I think if you can get like WXV1 to kind of be on like, and I'm like no disrespect to the women's Six Nations, but like if you can get like this big like global tournament to kind of be on like that same playing field as like Six Nations Rugby Championship, right, with a little
Hmm.
bit more of a global appeal, I think like having Canada beat the Black Ferns in New Zealand, right, sets up a very like intriguing like WXV where it's gonna have like the feeling that the tournament's gonna be a lot better if you kind of feel like anybody can beat anybody, right?
Mhm.
And like, we saw like in the last World Cup, Canada can hang with England, right? They got to
Mhm.
take another step to beat them. We just found out that New Zealand can beat England. We know that. We just found out that
Mhm.
Canada can beat England. We know France can beat Canada, right? Like, we know like Australia. Who's the other two teams that are at this WXV? Do we know them yet? We don't know.
So it's most likely for this year the USA because
We don't actually know,
uh,
right?
it's yeah. So it's hasn't been confirmed. It's basically if Australia beat New Zealand,
Hmm.
then Australia go through, and if New Zealand beat Australia, then the USA go through. So they're the final team. The other team is Ireland because they finished third in the Women's Six Nations this year.
Okay, well, like that, then well, either way, the point still stands that it's like if you go into that tournament with like the feeling of like, ooh, like anybody can beat anybody, I think it makes for a more
Mhm.
exciting like rugby tournament, which is actually probably more exciting than like the Six Nations, anyways. Because I still think, even though like Italy definitely took some strides this year, they're still at the bottom of that almost all the time, right? Um,
Mhm.
but I think like if you take women's rugby, right, like you can kind of have this really awesome like global tournament
Mhm.
and have like a top six that is super competitive with all six with the Pacific four teams and then England and France, I guess. Right. And maybe Ireland mixed in there too. But like that all can kind of beat each other, right?
Mhm.
So it's going to create a lot more dramatic and exciting tournament, which I think is going to be great for the women's game. And I mean, it'll be a pretty exciting October. Um, what about the well, we like I mean, we're kind of like talking about maybe a little bit of the impact and stuff, and it's been cool to see like news outlets that don't normally cover rugby picking this up. It definitely feels like certainly feels like one of, if not the biggest win that Canadian rugby, any of the national teams have had since like, I don't know, like the women's sevens team won a bronze medal at the Olympics. Like
Yeah.
been like I can't think of anything else that really I mean maybe some of the other women's World Cup appearances and stuff, but like I don't know if there's like a bigger win than this. Um but like I think right now so it's like that's kind of feeling good, but like I don't know, like what are your thoughts on like the actual game itself? Like is there anything that like stood out to you? Any like performances, big moments? What kind of grabbed your attention like watching the game?
I'd say the big thing that has to be mentioned is the incredible defensive effort from Canada throughout the entire game.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes it didn't work, and those are like say
Sometimes it didn't work. Yeah,
sometimes didn't work in
those are called
the
tries.
sense
Yeah,
that New Zealand did score
or yeah,
a couple of tries, and they had to. I think in like their third try, obviously when Canada were a woman down, that obviously that dynamic came into effect. But just the sheer amount of resilience
yeah,
and fortitude, and just you know after a tackle, after a ruck, just immediately getting back up, getting into that rush defense line, and just holding it off. Because again, this time last year, the score was I think like Canada 20, 24, 25, New Zealand 50 something. So,
yeah.
that is, one of the things that got addressed. And, we had talked about against like the games for like the USA and Australia. It was like, these are the areas that need to be focused on because New Zealand, you can't get away with them against the Black Ferns. And that was addressed. Those were the things that were highlighted. And, coming into the game, those were the areas that they knew that they needed to focus on to ensure that they would emerge victorious. And that's what they did. they were able to prevent it being like a runaway score like it was in Ottawa last year, and really cement the team's cohesiveness. I think that was a big thing as well. And obviously that ties into like both defense and attack, but
Mhm.
these players are just phenomenal together. I mean, they're phenomenal individually. Come on, we're talking about a team that has Sophie de Goody, Fancy Bermudez,
That's my World Cup.
Justine Peltier, and of course the most capped woman in Canadian 15s rugby, Tyson Bookaboom, getting her 68th
Yeah.
cap in this game. Setting the benchmark for others to reach. And but I can list off absolutely everyone in this squad, and
Go
they're
through the whole roster. The
incredible.
Menon got the player of the match too. Didn't even say her name.
Yeah,
But
to be
she was
well,
insane. She had so many
well,
like carries, tackles,
yeah,
obviously.
and that's the thing. It's like if I list off every great performer for Canada in this game, I'm just giving you the entire 23
it's yeah,
really at this
like
point. So, but yeah, McKinley Hunt, as I said before, continuing the successes from the game against Australia, picking up her third try of the tournament, and yeah, it's I think like you said at like the start of the episode, this is what like the best women's team in Canadian history.
no,
And
it's the best team in Canadian women or in Canadian rugby history, maybe. It's the best. Like,
I
what else is
mean,
there?
I
What
mean,
else is
yeah,
there?
to be honest, like
It's them
I
or the 91 World Cup men's World Cup team. What's yeah,
well,
that's the conversation. What's better? Which team is better?
I'd say this team because I can see this team making it past the
Yeah.
quarterfinals.
Yeah, both teams are captained by the goodies too. So like
Yeah, so
some common threads. Well, like,
yeah,
yeah,
61 and a half
right,
dozen.
exactly. Like it's like that's where I think like that's kind of the conversation you're having. Like it's them versus the most successful World Cup men's World Cup team, right?
Yeah,
Well, even this, like you probably even put in the 2014 World Cup team should probably get a shout out in that conversation too. There's more because probably going to be
yeah,
women's teams than men's teams in this conversation. To be fair,
yeah,
um,
yeah, that is true.
but
But that's the 2014 team, incredible
yeah,
what they did getting to the final of a women's rugby World Cup.
yeah.
But did they beat the Black Ferns?
That
And
oh, they didn't. Did they have to? No. But like, yeah, you only play who's in front of you. That's
that is true. But
but
right, right. Anyway, I'm not going to be pulling straws and just saying
no,
like I'm
they're a
just
great.
saying like what we've got now is an absolutely fantastic unit. Again, a cohesive team working together. I think the only player that I can't like single out for this game is Justine Peltier, and that's just because Olivia Apps got yellow carded before she could come onto the pitch. So,
Yeah, but she's so
but
great.
as
Um,
yeah, but again,
cheering.
you know, but I think as well, like mentioned before, like Fancy Bermudez, she started the game against the United States on the bench, and then she's just been a starter for the games against Australia and
Yeah.
New Zealand as well. And she's since she joined the 15s team last year against South Africa, it feels weird to say like she's been with this is only her second year with the 15s because she's just fantastic. And from what I've heard, she's already headed off to Madrid to help the sevens team in their championship push. So incredible
Yeah.
um,
Um,
Iron Woman style performance from her. And as you said, Menin, Hunt, Klein, incredible front row. And then who's their backup to Tosi, Castle, Ellis?
they were
In,
both great.
it's like six of one, half a dozen of the other, and it's all golden.
I mean,
It's
yeah. I'm kind of like even like listening to you like trying to talk about some of the players that played well. I'm kind of like, oh, like Royer I thought was great. She had like a ton of tackles early in the game too,
yeah.
or she got taken off. But like, I thought Royer Tessier I thought was unreal.
Mhm.
Shell I thought was like one of the best players on the pitch too. Like, because I thought
Yeah.
she like Demont really wanted to kick that ball to like control territory and possession. And like, to a degree, I think New Zealand actually did end up with a little bit more, but like that ball like never found like space to really do like a lot of damage. Like Shell did a very
Mm,
good job of covering the ground for, and kind of, giving Canada like, good opportunities and, good moments into territory and stuff, which Canada really did take advantage of. So I think like that was good. Honestly, like you said, I think we can go through the entire 23 player roster here and
mm,
mention something that they did well. Um, Sophie de Goody, just in like just insane.
yeah,
I I don't know. Like this game is just like I don't honestly, if you don't think she's the best player in the world yet, like you either have never watched the Canadian women play
mm,
or are just wrong. Like,
yeah,
like that, like, and shouldn't be like, I don't know what to like. It's like, she's like, if you took like Richie McCaw and Dan Carter and like
mhm,
won, like that's like if Tom Brady was a linebacker too, like and just
yeah,
the whole time. Like I don't like it's actually like insane what she does. Even like that Bermudez try, like you have a flanker shouldn't have hands that good. Because it's like that's I think that's the crazy thing, right? Is you watching the second Bermudez try,
yeah,
right? And it's like I think like New Zealand genuinely does looks like they don't know how to defend the fact that Sophie de Goody's about to get the ball, right?
yeah,
Because it's like, oh, like this is going to go to a flanker, which in
yeah,
the situation probably means run forward to the line to try to score, but it's
yeah,
so Sophie de Goody. So it's like here's like the one touch pass because you
mm,
bit on the fact that the flanker's getting the ball that close to the try line and he'll probably go and run into contact because that's what
yeah,
flankers do. But it's you have Sophie de Goody there that opens that up, right? Like
yeah. I think there was
it's
one.
just so many like
Yeah, there was one
yeah,
phase of play where Sophie de Goody had the ball and had taken a step, and New Zealand were like, "Oh,
yeah,
okay,
and you're
we
like
know what to do here." And so they have three players tackling her, and immediately they're out of position
all that
because
position, yeah.
get the ball gets out, on it goes, and now there's a gap in the defense, and Canada make meters. And
Yeah.
from a non-tactical mindset is like,
Yeah.
yeah, I would send three tacklers after Sophie de Goody just to ensure that anything's shut down. And then it's like, oh, defense. Forgot about
Yeah,
that.
but it's like that's the thing though, right? It's like, and I mean, I think that's kind of the thing with rugby is it's like, rugby I think is a game where it's like you really do need to win your one-on-one battles. And it's like
Yeah.
the moment you feel like you have to send two or three people to like, a contest or to a like, if you have to send somebody extra to a play to make sure a player doesn't like the goodie doesn't like slip away from you or something, it
Yeah.
does open up other possibilities. And I think teams are like I think that's what makes her so good is it's like teams are like obviously like very conscious of the fact that it's like this team has a flanker, eight flanker in this game, but like a back row player that can kick better than like it's kind of like the almost it's like that Beatles joke where they're like who's the drummer of the Beatles that they were like he's not
Ringo Starr.
Ringo Starr, yeah, and he's not it's like he it just do you think he's the best drummer in the world and all the other Beatles like he's not even the best drummer on the Beatles or whatever, right? And it's like it's like we have fly halves, we have fullbacks, we have exceptional players
Yeah.
in the back line that can kick, right?
Yeah.
But the best kicker on the team is is a flanker, right? So it's like I
Yeah.
think like when she touches the ball, you almost have to respect that she can chip this over the top of you, or she can put a grubber through and like to have it run on, or because she also has like Dan Carter-esque hands, can like spring somebody for like in the back line, right? You can go out that way. She's also going to beat you at every single ruck,
Mm,
every breakdown. She doesn't miss tackles. It's insane watching her play. It's
mm,
just genuinely mind-boggling. Um, And like I know obviously like it's just genuinely insane. I
Yeah.
love that you really shouted out the like the defense and the tackling
Mm,
of the team. Um I think because I think the biggest moment of this game, or maybe not the like biggest moment, biggest series of moments really. There was obviously that Canada held up a ball that New Zealand brought over the line
mhm.
in the last 5 minutes of the first half,
Yeah.
right? They had to kick the ball away, the dropout, right?
Mhm.
And New Zealand got to come back and attack, and Canada shut it down again, right? And kind of kept shutting it down. It ended up being a really huge defensive stand to end the half, right? And I think sometimes if I think in rugby, like the biggest momentum gaining time in a game is like the first 5 minutes before or the last 5 minutes before halftime and the first 5 minutes after halftime. I
Yeah.
think are like those are like the big like if you really want to shift the momentum of a game, you kind of have to do it in that window, right? And I think in this game, Canada was playing well. New Zealand had the edge on the scoreboard, obviously, but Canada was playing well, pretty even. New Zealand was causing some problems at the lineout, which I guess was mostly seemed to be because the New Zealand prop was just yelling stuff. Which I mean, fair play to the New Zealand to I can't remember which prop it was, but one of the New Zealand props was just yelling stuff, and fair play to them if that can throw off another team's lineout, by all means, go do it. But but it was like they were kind of struggling at the line out sometimes. They were hanging in there. They had good tackles, and then they had this huge defensive stop, right? And then they got to go in the halftime with the huge defensive stop. And I think
Mhm.
right, and I think the one thing that makes those plays so important is because now you get 15 minutes to think about it or whatever, right? Think about what you're doing right, think about what you're doing wrong. But Canada gets to go into the half being like, like this is great. Like, what a great defensive play, big defensive stand to end the game. Canada goes in the half hyped up. Black Ferns go into the half being like, well, shit, that's an opportunity wasted,
Yeah.
right? Canada then comes out of halftime, right? Canada then
Mhm.
comes out of the halftime, and McKinley Hunt scores a try within the first 5 minutes of the half, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's a pretty big swing. That try puts Canada up for the first time since the Sophie de Goody penalty. So for the first time in I guess what would that be just over half an hour since the Vaha Kolo try that put New Zealand back up after the Goody penalty. So that
Yeah.
puts Canada back in front, and then Canada never really looked back from that point on. It was a pretty big like momentum shift. And then like all the players off the bench start coming on, and everybody made a huge impact. But I think Canada's ability to weather a bit of a storm at the end of the first half, carry that momentum into the second half, and retake the lead very quickly in the second half, was like I think is a pretty big moment for them and kind of like really shifted the entire momentum of this game.
Yeah. And yeah, just and it's something that just adds to like the cohesiveness and the momentum as you were saying going along because we've seen fixtures like this before. I mean, 2 years ago in when it was back in New Zealand, Canada were nilled. Last year it was a 50 something to 20 something blowout, and now we're here where Canada win by 3 points. But it's because of everything they were doing in that game was just they just turned the screw a little bit tighter. That you know, as you mentioned, the defense to hold up a try 5 minutes before half time, but
Mhm.
everything just seemed to click together. Everything just came along really well. And even when Olivia Apps did get that yellow card, Because I, having seen Brunt get the yellow card, I was like, oh, this is when New Zealand are down to 14, but each of their players, their stats double because that's just like the standard in New Zealand. And I've seen it with like the All Blacks and I've seen it with the Black Ferns as well.
Yeah.
And what Canada did was like they out attacked, they out defended, they
Yeah.
brought it all together, and they are second in the world. And it kind of reminds me of back in 2022 when Canada had just lost the semi-final to England, and Sophie de Goody was being interviewed and said that for Canada to compete, they needed, you know, more games,
Resources.
more resources, more time together,
Yeah.
and the WXV hadn't started. That was starting the year later. The Pacific Four Series in 2022, it was the first time to have four teams. It had only just been between Canada and the US the year before.
Hmm.
So, and since that um, third place game, which was after that interview, but the points were still reiterated after that game. We have now seen Canada play 12 matches. Um, they've done WXV, they did friendlies against South Africa and England.
Hmm.
They've done and they hosted a round of the Pacific Four Series.
Yeah.
This was their 12th game. They had gone from being nilled to New Zealand and nilled by France in the same year
Yeah.
to have beaten the world champions in the world champions' backyard. This is what we have been saying
Yeah.
for like years.
Well,
And and obviously Sophie de Goody has been saying it as well, and Kevin Rouet has been saying it as well. The resources, the match time, as soon as that increase, Canada can be competitive, not just to stay in the top four, but to challenge those three other teams. This is the proof.
yeah, and I think too, like this is obviously a huge moment. Like we just said, like we said a couple times on this podcast already, like they're probably this team's probably, you know, already one of the best teams that Canada's ever had. Right. That's one of the biggest moments in Canadian rugby's history, right? And I think right now, I think like if you're Rugby Canada, and you want to grow the sport in this country, like this is the team to do it with.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously they're hosting a tournament, a bit WXV1 being hosted in BC later this year. So like Rugby Canada needs to be like all over that.
Mm-hmm.
As far as, but the like Rugby Canada, like I think right now, I think we talked about this a few episodes ago. Can't remember which one, but like women's sports, especially in North America, is having a massive surge right now. Like Caitlin Clark is bringing more attention to women's basketball than
Yeah.
maybe ever been. The PWHL is like finally looks like we got a viable women's professional hockey league off the ground, which is a wild thing to think that that took as long as it did. But
Mm-hmm.
PWHL season's been great, damn near impossible to get a ticket to a game in Toronto. Unfortunately, in true Toronto fashion, they choked in the first round, but that's besides the point. Um, but like you like that's obviously incredible, and then there's all the other like women's sports that are thriving right now, right? And I think like if you're Rugby Canada, like you have to look at this team, the women's national team, as like if you want rugby to succeed, like I think you got to do it through this team. Like Sophie de Goody is genuinely the best player in the world, and like if Rugby Canada needs to find a way to get her face like everywhere. Right, like they need to do like Tyson, same with like Tyson Bukaboom. You can like give her like the kind of the legend treatment and stuff, and then like it's also maybe like kind of up to like World Rugby to like let the athletes like have their personalities shine, and like their faces need to be like everywhere. Like
Mm.
this win, like you saw, like this was on like the normal like global news, like CTV news stuff, right? Like this made that like those types of like segments. TSN, like TSN, we always give TSN, like, oh, Canadian rugby fans always give TSN shit for the way they actually cover the game.
Mm.
This got on to like actual like TSN, like on
Yeah.
their actual proper like news channels and stuff, right? It's not just like hey, it's on the website and you got to go dig for it and find it, right? They gave it like they gave this game a prime time replay too, because it happened at like what 3 a.m. or whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
like they boosted this game a little bit because it's historic, right?
Mhm.
And I think like you need to like this is the team to grow the game around. So, I mean, like it's very, I think, like Christine Sinclair for Canadian women's soccer is like, yeah, when
Mhm.
you have one of the best players in the world and she's captaining like a great team, and Canada made a run and they won like gold medals and World Cups and stuff with Christine Sinclair, right? It's like that was the boost that soccer Canada needed, came through the women's team, right? And I think like Rugby Canada right now, it's like you should be looking at the women's team to in right now in like a similar light as being like, if you want to grow the game here, right? It's like, right, if you want to grow the game here, you use Sophie de Goody, use Fancy Bermudez, use Tyson Bukaboom, use Alex Tessier, use Olivia Apps, etc., go through the whole roster. But like that's, I think this is where Rugby Canada, like your marketing focus maybe should, like
Yeah.
especially hosting WXV, like grow the game of rugby as a whole through the women's team, right? Especially it's like, the men have some games coming up, but they're not really going to have any games that are going to be as big as anything as the women's are playing, especially not on home soil, right? And like who knows what's going to happen with the Olympics, right? The men still have to earn their spot in the Olympics, right? So it's
Yeah.
but the women are there, right? So it's like, like you women's rugby might be the the way to go. And I think too, though, going back to like some of those other like great Canadian rugby moments that we were thinking of, right? It's like you have to also Rugby Canada also has to know that like just winning isn't necessarily enough
Mhm.
to grow the sport, right? Because it's like that's something that I think gets brought up a few times. Is like it's like, oh, like if USA or Canada like wins a medal at the Olympics, how much like of a boost that'll give the game and stuff. And it's like Canada won a medal at the first Olympics that rugby was at, and we're still
Yeah.
at this spot, right? Um,
Mm.
so like if Canada wins a World Cup and stuff, like you need to do you need to do all the off-field stuff, right? All the marketing, promotion, social media, all of that, in order to grow the game too. And I think all the women that are on this team, right, for the next like when's the next Women's World Cup? Next year?
Next year in England,
Next year in England. So like what, in October?
September, October time.
September, October? Yeah. Okay. So for the next like what is that, 17, 18 months?
Hmm.
Right? Like you put all your effort into making these the most popular 23 athletes in Canada.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the way the game is going to grow in this country now, is like because this team is incredibly exciting. They got athletes that are genuinely super fun to follow on social media, right? They have a captain that is an awesome like Canadian rugby like legacy story, and also the best player in the world. Like there's so much that this team has going for it right now that Rugby Canada needs to capitalize on it, not just from their on-field performances, but also for like who they are like off the field. Like
Yeah.
I think this is where Rugby Canada's focus not to say that they should like disregard the other teams, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah, I
there's
get it.
something special with this group that you need to capitalize on this because this could be a big boost for growing the game in this country, especially growing, say, like women's participation and stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, if Rugby Canada is smart, they will be implementing that. I definitely expect to see a lot of advertising for the WXV beginning round about July, August time. And if they follow on from what initiatives they had in Ottawa of like free tickets for kids with every purchase of an adult's ticket, then you're going to fill up those stadiums no problem. But you know, bringing it all back, congratulations to Canada on not only beating New Zealand for the first time, moving to second in the world rankings, but also winning the 2024 Pacific 4 Series. Now, as we said last episode, that the Rugby Sevens Challenger Series
Mhm.
was set to take place, and we now have teams that have qualified from that, which include Uruguay, Germany, Chile, and so we now have our pools for the relegation playoff in Madrid. So the Canadian men will be facing the USA, Uruguay, and Germany. I say facing. That's all we've been told is the pool. We haven't even been told how the format's going to be. But that will be taking place next weekend. And we've also had the Arrows Academy playing 2 games this past weekend. The first one was against Greystones RFC. For those that don't know, Greystones RFC is an Irish club who are currently on tour. And they played the final result Academy 17, Greystones 42. According to the Instagram showing the results, it was described as not our day, but lots to learn from a quality Irish side. Thank you to Greystones for coming and putting up a quality game, because the very next day was the first round for the Academy of the East Coast Rugby Championship. They were playing Rugby Quebec. Final score Academy 15, Rugby Quebec 57. So, 2 losses in as many days, the uh, not the most motivating thing. Although it is a resilient performance from the team, but just slipped off in the end. And they play the Free Jacks Academy this coming Sunday, and that'll be the final group game. And then for the first weekend of June, they will be taking part against the corresponding team for the Eastern Conference, and we should know that in about 2 weeks' time. So they will be playing the New England Independent on May 22nd at Syracuse University for a 2:30 p.m. kickoff. And we go from the East Coast to the West Coast, back again with the Vancouver Highlanders, who could just continue adding to their team. They've added to their main squad Carl Hunger, and to the reserve squad Dimitri Patterson and Cole Kelly. The annoying thing is that I don't know if you've noticed, Derek, they number the main squad and the reserve squad, they don't have numbers on. So it's kind of the onus is on us to see how many are actually in the reserve squad. And, though a lot of these guys will be playing on June 26th because it is that double header. Lots of rugby to be looking at. See, we've mentioned men's sevens, men's academy, the Vancouver Highlanders. There's not just women's rugby. They just happen to be the best in the world at the moment. So, I mean,
They are.
what
They're
can
the
you
best
do?
at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely fair that. But as I said, the Pacific Four Series for Canada at least has come to an end. There's still a game between New Zealand and Australia, basically to decide who is going to be the third team in the WXV1 later this year. That could be on TSN. We're not 100% sure, but you should be able to catch highlights on rugbypass.tv. But if you are looking to watch any games this weekend, you can watch MLR games as well as Premiership Women's Rugby on the Rugby Network. The Premiership and URC is currently on a break for this week, but when that returns next week, you can watch it on Sportsnet because this weekend we have the Champions and Challenge Cup finals, and you can watch those games on epcrugby.tv. And remember, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out more as well as our written pieces on our website, therougerugby.ca. You can also find the podcast on Spotify, S4P, and Apple Podcasts. We're on our YouTube channel at The Rouge Rugby. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell notification to stay up to date with all our videos. We're also available across social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. We're still not calling it X. Don't ask us about it. All at The Rouge Rugby. And Derek, where can people find you on social media?
At Percept the Jet across all social media networks.
And you can find me across social media at Hardman, spell H4RDMAN. Well, that's where we're going to end this episode. Derek, thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby and the amazing Canadian women's rugby team. We hope you can join us again next time.